Hello and welcome to Africa This Week with me, Annisa Omar. This show looks at the affairs of sub-Saharan Africa and the African diaspora. Today we'll be discussing what Sierra Leone's post-Ebola recovery looks like, and later on in the show we'll be asking, is there under-reporting of African refugees in the refugee crisis? But first, Ivory Coast Constitutional Council on Monday confirmed the re-election of President Alassane Ouattara for 5 years in an official proclamation 8 days after the vote. Adama Manunu has more on this and the rest of the week's headline news.
It is fitting to proclaim him elected, were the words of Mamadou Kone, President of the Ivory Coast's Constitutional Council. Kone earlier said Ouattara had won over 2 million of the total 3 million ballots cast, giving Ouattara a score of almost 84% of the vote. The council upheld the results issued by the Independent Electoral Commission, which put the turnout at around 53% of the 6 million registered voters. Ouattara, a 73-year-old economist whose first election victory in 2010 triggered several months of violence and bloodshed, had solidly beat main opposition candidate Pascal Affi-N'Guessan, who took 9.29% of the votes. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange launched an investigation into mobile giant MTN for possible insider trading before the South African company announced that it had been hit by a $5.2 billion fine in Nigeria. The Nigerian Communications Commission fined Africa's largest telecoms firm for missing a deadline to deactivate 5.1 million unregistered SIM cards. News of the fine broke on Monday morning in Nigeria, sparking a sell-off of MTN shares before the company formally notified shareholders later in the day. South African law dictates that companies immediately warn shareholders about price-sensitive information. MTN issued a statement saying senior management of the company and its advisors are currently engaging with the JSE Limited on the timing of the announcement. The probe could result in South Africa's bourse operator slapping MTN with another hefty fine or result in criminal charges. South African state prosecutors on Tuesday argued in court for Oscar Pistorius to be convicted of murder and sent back to jail 2 weeks after he was released on house arrest. The disgraced Paralympic sprinter was found guilty last year of culpable homicide, a charge equivalent to manslaughter, after shooting dead his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day in 2013. At the Supreme Court of Appeal in Bloemfontein, state prosecutors tried to convince judges that Pistorius should be found guilty of murder and sentenced to a minimum of 15 years in prison. He was released on October 19th to spend the remainder of his sentence at his uncle's mansion in Pretoria. Prosecutor Jerry Nell began his case, arguing that Pistorius intentionally meant to kill whoever was behind the door. The state lawyers have described the sentence as shockingly light, inappropriate, and said not enough emphasis was placed on the horrendous manner in which Steenkamp died. A panel of 5 judges heard the arguments from the state and defence, with the proceedings scheduled to last 1 day. The judges are then expected to announce a future date to deliver their ruling. At least 36 people were killed on Wednesday when a plane crashed shortly after taking off from South Sudan's capital, Juba. Police and rescue workers pulled bodies of men, women and children out of the wreckage of the Russian-built Antonov An-12 cargo plane, which smashed into a farming community on an island on the White Nile River, seconds after taking off. 2 survivors were pulled out of the twisted metal hulk of the plane, but one of those later died, with a young boy the only survivor, according to the Red Cross, who also said the number of dead may still rise. On Wednesday, Uganda's veteran leader Yoweri Museveni and opposition challenger Amama Mbabazi were approved by the Electoral Commission to run in presidential polls next year. The formal nomination kickstarts campaigning ahead of polls slated for February 2016, the third decade in power for Museveni, who has led the East African nation since 1986. Opposition leaders have said they will field a joint candidate, expected to be either Kizza Besigye, leader of the Forum for Democratic Change Party, and a three-time challenger, or ex-Prime Minister Mbabazi. In September, efforts to select the candidate for the Democratic Alliance coalition collapsed when Besigye and Mbabazi failed to agree who would be the leader. However, last week, they agreed again to field a joint candidate. Nevertheless, Museveni and the ruling National Resistance Movement are still widely expected to return to power. The Ebola epidemic has been brought to a close in Sierra Leone, having gone 42 days without any new infections. But jubilation over ending the outbreak in the impoverished nation, where almost 4,000 deaths have been reported, has been tempered by caution, with neighbouring Guinea still battling the virus. According to the World Health Organization, Guinea is now monitoring 382 possible contacts, 141 of them deemed high risk. Paulo Conte, the head of Sierra Leone's Ebola response, told a news conference in Freetown on Wednesday that there were no plans for an elaborate celebration. The real toll is widely believed to be significantly higher than the official data. However, with underreporting of probable Ebola cases rife in the early stages. The announcement marks the official end of a battle which was prematurely thought to have been nearing its conclusion on previous occasions. President Ernest Bai Koroma led a festive ceremony on August 24th, celebrating the discharge of Sierra Leone's last known patient. But the optimism was shattered by the deaths of a 67-year-old woman and 2 weeks later a 16-year-old girl. The World Bank estimates that Sierra Leone will lose at least $1.4 billion in economic growth in 2015 as a result, leading to an unprecedented GDP contraction of 23.5%. The economic damage has been exacerbated by a sharp decline in global iron ore prices and the collapse of the mining sector amid an exodus of foreign investors. Ebola spread to Sierra Leone 18 months ago when a young pregnant woman and an older housewife were diagnosed as the country's first cases.
To discuss Sierra Leone's post-Ebola recovery, we have Mustapha Dumbuya, who is a human rights journalist and community media trader working with the BBC. He has also covered the Ebola outbreak as it ravaged communities in Sierra Leone. Welcome to the show, Mustapha. So to begin, we hear that this weekend the Ebola crisis has been cleared in Sierra Leone. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm very excited, like any other Sierra Leonean, about this good news. We've finally reached 42 days. We've been waiting way too long for this day. It's a very exciting moment for me. You know, even though I'm away from home now and I'm here in Canada, but my mind and my soul is still in Sierra Leone, and I'm very excited and I'm very happy. I have spoken with my family.
Would you say perhaps this excitement is a bit too early, given the cases that appeared again in Liberia after the fact that the Ebola crisis had been cleared there also?
I understand. In as much as I'm very excited about this landmine, about reaching 42 days without recording any new Ebola case, I'm also, celebrating with caution. I'm also very cautious. And I hope a lot of my compatriots will also think this way. We've reached 42 days, but I still believe the fight against Ebola is still on the way. We are not yet done.
What is this fight? It's not just an international communities of NGOs and other UNHCRs flying in and delivering aid. Is it more of, would you say, a community effort with the local infrastructures really doing the work?
I think this fight should be really in our own hands now. It's about taking care of our own future. It's about looking after ourselves. We always look up to the international community for help. But I think it's high time, at this point we're at now, it's high time to take care of ourselves. It's high time we started thinking about, taking and owning this fight. And I believe we've been doing that for a long time now. And that is why we are even able to get to this point. Sierra Leoneans have now realized that the fight against Ebola will not be over if we only rely
So what is this
on...
fight in terms of journalism? Not only the fight within the health systems themselves and within communities, but what is this spotlight, how is this spotlight put forward by Sierra Leone journalists themselves?
So I think journalists in Sierra Leone have played a really crucial role in getting to where we are today, in getting to 0 cases, in getting to 42 days. And I think we have to continue to do that. We have to continue to tell people in different medium, in different radio stations, in different media, outlets about the dangers of not being complacent. And I think those are the kind of messages we should be taking out now, about not being complacent, about continuing to observe and follow all the health precautionary messages that we've been doing for the past year and more, telling people...
In terms of survivors, what would you say is needed in terms of the health structures in helping not only survivors that have just come about with the disease, but also people that have survived the disease? Do you think that it's enough what's being done, or do you think that the international community and the government needs to do more?
And this is why earlier when I said, in as much as I'm excited about getting to 42 days, I'm also worried, I'm worried about the vulnerable people that have been affected by the outbreak. And we talk about the survivors of the Ebola outbreak, and not only the survivors, we have orphans. We have well over 3,000 children that have been orphaned by Ebola. There are a lot of widows that are still around, that have been affected by this, by this outbreak. So we still need, the Sierra Leone government and the international communities post-Ebola is now to focus on the victims, people that have been affected by the Ebola outbreak. And of course, everyone in Sierra Leone is affected. We have a cliche, we say you are either infected or affected. So one way or the other, every Sierra Leonean is affected by the Ebola outbreak. But we have people who are more vulnerable. We have people who are more affected than others. And these are the victims. And we all know the long-term side effects of Ebola, and we've seen that with the Scottish nurse, Pauline.
So this is a great victory against an awful disease, and you're happy to have seen it come by?
Yeah, this is a great victory to, against a very strange and mysterious disease, that attack us not only to kill, but also to destroy some of the traditional...
There's also the argument that perhaps it's been a bit too sensationalized within the international media, and that actually there's a lot more talk than there is action, and that given the return of Ebola in Liberia and new cases in Guinea, that actually some of it is talk, and that more action's needed, not from Sierra Leoneans themselves, but more from the wider international community. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I also hope, as we celebrate this day and the international media, is carrying celebration, covering the celebrations, but I also hope we should not forget about the real issues, in this struggle, the real issues. And it's still too early, to be overexcited. But I will tell you, I am personally excited for a lot of reasons, but we still have to be very cautious. Guinea, our neighbors, is still registering cases. Just last week, they recorded a case. So we should be very careful about how we celebrate. But by now, we should be working very closely with our Guinean counterparts in the borders to ensure that we monitor and we properly check people crossing over the borders, even though we've not got any case directly of a cross-border transmission so far. But it's something we should also be looking forward to, because Guinea and Sierra Leone share a common border, and we share common cultures.
And do you think there will be lessons learned from Guinea and Liberia that Sierra Leone could possibly use?
And of course, yes, we have lessons to learn, especially from Liberia, that had been declared Ebola-free before us. And we all saw what happened in Liberia. there was a return of cases just weeks after the country had been declared Ebola-free. So that should be a lesson for us, that in as much as we celebrate, we should also be very watchful. We should also ensure that we have the systems and the structures in place to overcall any other unforeseen, situation that arises.
Of it coming back again. Mustapha, I'm going to have to interrupt you, but it's been fantastic speaking, and we thank you very much for your comments. We'll now be moving on to discuss articles that have made this week's headlines. Joining me is our reporter, Khalil Charles. So, Khalil, what articles do you have for us this week?
Well, Annisa, I've got obviously covering what was mentioned in the news report, the tragic situation of the plane crash. 40 people reported
plane crash in South Sudan.
That's right, plane crash in South Sudan. 40 people reported to have lost their lives. The interesting thing here is actually the plane was supposed to be a cargo plane.
Oh, really?
So the fact that there were 40 people on board is very unusual.
It's a lot of people.
And so, you know, the reports were, firstly, there were 18 people lost. There were other reports. There were, and then children also involved in that. We have just one survivor now, and that's a child. I think it's about 6, 7, 8 years of age, and that survived the crash. And obviously, this comes down in an area where the South Sudan, of course, have been going through problems. There's a civil war going on, and so it's come down in an area where just north of the area where the fighting was going on.
Would you say because South Sudan is very much a developing country and the government is not in these sort of outskirts in areas, this is why there wasn't a quicker response and a media spotlight on it?
It could very well be, of course. I mean, you know, if we talk about, for example, the plane is first flew in 1971, a very old plane of Russian Antonov apparently, and that of course is because of maintenance, because of the lack of funds, if you like. So that South Sudan, of course, was part of Sudan for a while, and the sanctions against Sudan meant that Sudan weren't renewing planes, and if they did, they weren't going to be able to get the parts for them.
Interesting, Russians built.
Exactly. There were, of course, Russians crew on board, and of course we do understand that the numbers of people inside that plane is irregular. There shouldn't have been so many people.
Sounds like a lot. What is our second story today?
Our second story looks at the drought, which is kind of engulfing South Africa at the moment. Bad times. I mean, you know, back in 1982, there was a similar drought which engulfed all the country, and although there wasn't any deaths reported, a lot of damage to livestock, a lot of damage to arable farming, etc.
Because agriculture is huge in South Africa. How is that it's going to affect a huge amount of people?
Well, already the prices of crops and the prices of vegetables, etc., are going up. So there's an immediate effect that's taking place. Inside Pretoria, people are having to ration water, and unfortunately, in the northern areas, like Limpopo, etc., it's likely to be declared in the next couple of days that is also a drought area.
So definitely a lot more media needed to spotlight that issue.
Well, indeed, I think what we're seeing here is a natural disaster about to happen, and really there should be more.
It should have been foreseen.
But in a sense, yes, the South African government are trying to do their best. They've put $26 million into the Quasi.
So they're doing their part.
Zulu-Natal. Well, they're trying to. They've put in as much money in the two affected areas, which is KwaZulu.
Is it climate change? Would you say that's affected?
That seems to be the case. Yes, it seems to be the case. I mean, it seems to be the El Nino weather problem, which has added to the fact that there are bad rains. Back in '82, it was also the case of having 2 years of no rains. So here we're talking about roughly the same thing. There's a long period now where those rains haven't come down, and it's really starting to affect the economy.
So these issues need to be foreseen earlier, it sounds like.
Indeed, they do.
So what's our third article?
We're going to stay with South Africa in our third article.
We're in South Africa today.
We are, and with the South Africans' favourite son, if you like, Trevor Noah.
Trevor Noah, I'm aware of who Trevor Noah is, but please do tell our audience, who is Trevor Noah?
Trevor Noah is a fantastic South African comedian who's kind of shot onto the scene of comedy with his wonderful varying accents, American, Mexican, you know, you name it, the guy can... He's doing it. He's doing it. The guy can mimic people.
And he's in the US, I've heard, as well.
He is, because he's taken over from the Daily Show, which has been now, you know, he's taken it as the
it's
head.
It's a very old show, very well known in America.
I think it's Stewart, the guy who used to run it, and so he stepped down, and Trevor Noah has come into the fore, and he's made it his own. I mean, he really has. He's such a funny guy.
An amazing role to get, but also a good way of getting the African narrative out there to wider audiences, would you say?
Indeed. I mean, this guy has so many different cultural aspects in his comedy that brings to the awareness to the public about what it is to be African, what it is to be, and he's actually mixed race, okay? Mixed race.
So he's got both worlds there.
And so he uses that to the best of his advantage and really does bring up some really important issues in a very, very comical way.
So I think we've sold Trevor Noah now to our audiences. So what's our final story, Khalil?
Our final story is good news for Nigerian author Adichie, Chimamanda Adichie. She has won the best of the best. Now, let me tell you what...
The best of the best,
Indeed,
wow.
let me tell you what that is. That is, every 10 years, the prize is given to the best woman a fiction author. Okay, it's a prize which is a £30,000 prize every year, which isn't bad to put in your pocket for the end of the year.
Quite a lot,
and Chimamanda, she has actually won the decade between 2004 and 2014. She has been out of the 10 winners in that year. She's been voted the best.
And Chimamanda, I'm very much aware of her in Americana, her book. Half of the Yellow Sun, very well known.
That's the book that really got to there.
Of
course, that's the book which talks about the situation in Biafra. Of course, the Biafra War in Nigeria, the Nigerian Civil War that took place in 1967 to 1970. I don't think you were around that, but I was young and heard all about. It was a very important time.
And she paints it in a different way in terms of creating a more of a community narrative, a more humane narrative, would you say?
Indeed. Of course, it was the Igbo tribe that were affected mostly by that area.
Yes.
And, you know, she comes from that tribe, and so she's able to see the community as
and tell the world effectively.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Khalil.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure.
So after the break, we'll be taking a look at African migrants and ask if there is much coverage on their plight. See you in a moment.